Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today I will analyze the case of Natalie Cochran. First, I'll look at the background of this case, move to the timeline of the crime, then offer my analysis. Natalie Page Cochran was born in November 1980 and lived in West Virginia. When she was in high school, she met a man named Michael Cochran, and they became romantically involved. After graduating, the lovers attended West Virginia University. Natalie studied to be a pharmacist, whereas Michael was interested in information technology. In 2000, while they were still in college, the couple married. After graduation, Natalie worked as a pharmacist. In 2006, the couple moved to Daniels, West Virginia. This is 69 miles south of Charleston. They purchased a 3,000 square foot house on 4H Lake Road for $253,000. The three-bedroom house sat on almost 4 acres of land. Natalie and Michael raised 2 children in the house, a daughter and a son. In 2017, Natalie surprised friends and family members when she quit her job as a pharmacist and started a business. Supposedly, this business supplied firearms and other items to various government agencies, like the CIA, Homeland Security, the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the Department of Defense, and the Department of Justice. She told people that she was inspired by the 2016 movie War Dogs, which is about inexperienced arms dealers who are ultimately arrested. Using War Dogs as an inspiration to establish a gun business is like using Titanic as a guide to starting a cruise line. Natalie approached a number of people to invest in her business, like family members, friends, coworkers, and neighbors. She told people that she was bidding on various government contracts. When she identified a contract where she could earn a lot of profit, she would pursue it vigorously. The problem was she needed to raise a large amount of money quickly in order to secure the contract. Using this high-pressure tactic, Natalie was able to convince several people to invest a lot of money, like $250,000, $500,000. It was amazing how much money people were willing to put in. People trusted Natalie and assumed her business was legitimate. They also trusted her husband, Michael, who worked in the business with Natalie. From an outside perspective, it appeared as though the business was doing very well. Natalie and Michael started living a lavish lifestyle. They took vacations to Paris and Hawaii and eventually owned 3 properties, motorcycles, a boat, and a classic sports car. Nobody suspected that anything was amiss until an incident involving a middle school baseball league fund, which was managed by Natalie. Through a fundraiser, the league had raised $32,000, but the money disappeared from the bank. Natalie denied any wrongdoing, but many people were suspicious because she had control over the money. Sometime after this, investors in Natalie's supply business started complaining about not collecting a return on their investment. Before moving to the timeline of the crime, let's hear a word from today's sponsor, Stamps.com. Remaining flexible in your workday is one of the keys to success. For instance, focusing on the important parts of the business that only you can do. With Stamps.com, tedious tasks like sending certified mail, invoices, checks, documents, and packages can be done on your time, not someone else's. Stamps.com simplifies your postage needs and adds valuable flexibility back into your workday. Stamps.com handles all your mailing and shipping needs whenever, wherever. Seamlessly connect with every major marketplace and shopping cart if you sell products online. Access all the USPS and UPS services you need to run your business right from your computer or phone, anytime, day or night, no lines, no traffic, and no waiting. Have more flexibility in your life with Stamps.com. Sign up at Stamps.com/Dr. Grande for a special offer that includes a 4-week trial, plus free postage and a free digital scale. No long-term commitments or contracts. Just go to Stamps.com/Dr. Grande. Now moving to the timeline of the crime. On February 6, 2019, Michael Cochran and his wife Natalie were scheduled to take a small plane to Lynchburg, Virginia. The purpose of the trip was to meet a Bank of America employee and discuss the supply business. As Michael was preparing for the trip, he suddenly became severely ill. He collapsed and required assistance to get to a couch. Natalie called a friend of hers who was a West Virginia state trooper and the trooper's wife who was in the medical field. Natalie was advised to take Michael to the hospital, but she insisted that he just needed to sleep it off. Throughout the day, Natalie communicated with various other people, some of whom visited the Cochran family house. Pretty much everybody gave Natalie the same advice. Michael needed to go to a hospital. Natalie kept insisting that Michael hated the hospital and had made it clear that he did not want to go. Eventually, Natalie called a friend of Michael's who was an attorney. After he visited the house and observed Michael's condition, he transported Michael to Raleigh General Hospital. Michael was in bad shape when he was admitted. He was unconscious, and his glucose level was 21. This is extremely low. The normal range is between 80 and 100. Michael Cochran never regained consciousness. He died on February 11, 2019, at the age of 38. The official determination about his death was natural causes. Despite this, the police were suspicious about Michael's death and launched an investigation. On April 8, 2019, they interviewed Natalie Cochran. She told them that on February 6, the day her husband Michael collapsed, they were home together when Michael went into the kitchen. At about 10 a.m., Natalie heard a thud. This was Michael hitting the floor. When she investigated, she found a testosterone supplement on the counter. This must have been what caused Michael's medical problem. Investigators interviewed Natalie again on May 7. This time she told the same story, but said that she found the supplement in a kitchen cabinet as opposed to on the counter. The next day, when Natalie was interviewed for a third time, she claimed that Michael injected himself in the back with insulin. The police never mentioned insulin. It was Natalie who introduced the idea of this drug being involved. Investigators learned that on the day Michael collapsed, Natalie borrowed a vial of insulin from a friend of hers, whose son was prescribed insulin. During the search of Natalie's house, investigators found the insulin in her refrigerator. As the investigation into Michael's death continued, the police were also looking into Natalie's mysterious supply business. As it turns out, Natalie had been lying. There were no federal government supply contracts. She had been running a Ponzi scheme. This meant that Natalie had collected money from investors and paid returns to the early investors using the money of newer investors. There were no actual profits which could be used to pay returns. Ponzi schemes are dependent on an endless supply of new investors, which is impossible. In September 2019, Natalie was arrested and charged with 26 felony counts related to stealing from investors and committing bank fraud. She had taken over $2 million from her victims. Natalie was not charged in connection with the money that was missing from the baseball league. During the same year that Natalie was arrested for fraud, Michael's body was exhumed. The testing was inconclusive. The authorities could not determine how Michael died, but they were still convinced that Natalie murdered him. In September 2020, Natalie pleaded guilty to wire fraud and money laundering charges. In March 2021, she was sentenced to 11 years in prison. In November 2021, Natalie was indicted for murder, but the state dismissed the charges in April 2023, wanting more time to build a case. Later in 2023, Michael's body was exhumed again. This time, insulin was detected in his remains. In October 2023, Natalie Cochran was once again indicted for murder. She went to trial in January 2025 and was found guilty of murder on January 29. On January 30, the jury returned a no-mercy decision, which meant they recommended a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. Now moving to my analysis. Natalie Cochran maintains her innocence, and she does have a few supporters. They argue that there is no way to prove how Michael died. Maybe natural causes were to blame. The state, of course, disagrees. They believe the murder conviction is supported by the evidence. Natalie murdered her husband, Michael, to keep the Ponzi scheme concealed. This brings me to the question, was Natalie guilty of murder? Let's take a look at the evidence both for and against the idea that she was guilty, starting with the inculpatory factors. Natalie admitted to perpetrating a Ponzi scheme which cost investors over $2 million. In the time leading up to his death, Michael asked Natalie a series of questions which were consistent with him having suspicions about the business they were running, almost like Michael was on his way to figuring out that it was a scam. In October 2018, Michael experienced dizziness. In November, he was treated in a hospital. Natalie suspected that he had been exposed to black mold. In December, Michael had told a contractor that he felt like he had been poisoned. 2 days before Michael collapsed, Natalie contacted a friend and asked for an injectable steroid. On February 6, 2019, the day Michael collapsed, he and his wife Natalie were scheduled to visit with a bank employee. If this meeting took place, Michael may have discovered that his wife was engaged in fraud. This same day, Natalie requested insulin from a friend of hers. Not long after Natalie acquired the insulin, her husband Michael collapsed. 5 days later, he died. Michael's death was consistent with insulin poisoning. For instance, his glucose level was extremely low. Again, it was 21. When Michael's body was exhumed for the second time, insulin was detected. Natalie borrowed the insulin from a friend, claiming that she required it to address symptoms related to cancer, but Natalie did not have cancer. Later, Natalie said that she kept the insulin in her house for the friend's son, but the friend indicated there was never such an arrangement. Natalie was a pharmacist who specialized in diabetes, therefore she understood the effects of insulin. After Michael's death, Natalie continued to defraud investors with her Ponzi scheme. Moving to the exculpatory factors, it is possible that Michael already knew about the Ponzi scheme when he died. For example, just like Natalie, he spent a lot of money on extravagant purchases. Where did he think this money was coming from? Could anybody really believe that this small business was legitimately earning millions of dollars? His daughter said that Michael was secretive when working on government contracts on his computer. His son said that Michael had become aggressive. Michael frequently took various supplements and drugs. He had a series of medical problems leading up to his death, which could point to Natalie trying to kill him, but could also indicate that he was in poor health. 2 medical experts said that Michael's cause of death could not be determined. Furthermore, he had a benzodiazepine in his urine, but did not have a prescription for this drug. This supports the idea that Michael was irresponsible with his substance use. There is no doubt that Natalie was a fraudster, but most people who commit fraud do not commit homicide. When considering all the evidence in this case, do I think that Natalie Cochran was guilty of murder? Yes, I am convinced of her guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. The timing with the insulin is difficult for her defense to overcome. What do I think happened in this case? This is just a theory, my opinion. Natalie Cochran was self-centered, grandiose, overconfident, impulsive, irresponsible, greedy, materialistic, hedonistic, manipulative, deceptive, cold, callous, remorseless, and had a sense of entitlement. Making a living as a pharmacist wasn't good enough for her. She wanted more out of life. In her mind, she deserved to be wealthy even if she had to take money from others. Natalie started a Ponzi scheme knowing that it was a mathematical certainty the scheme would fail. She wasn't concerned about the future. Natalie was focused on what she could obtain in the moment. This was her time to shine and live her dream life. Michael was gullible and had a very high level of trust in his wife. He may have suspected that something was amiss, but he probably didn't think Natalie was involved in criminal activity. He liked the extravagant lifestyle, so maybe he thought to himself it was better not to ask too many questions. Michael did assist in the business, like he would get on his computer and look at contracts, but it was Natalie who engaged in the criminal activity. Michael was probably just given busy work by Natalie to make him feel like he was contributing. Perhaps it was his job to identify these contracts, which he would then send to Natalie to pursue. In reality, Natalie wasn't pursuing any contracts. She was simply stealing money from investors. The investors had a tremendous level of trust in Natalie. It simply never occurred to them that she was defrauding them. There were many signs that Natalie was involved in a scam. For example, she told people that her business was worth $500 million. Amazingly, this claim did not dissuade investors from putting in more money. People really believed that Natalie, a pharmacist with no experience in government contracts, could own a home-based business worth $500 million. These investors may have had some difficulty understanding mathematics. Natalie was doing an excellent job at manipulating investors, but she became worried about Michael. The meeting with Bank of America, scheduled for February 6, 2019, was of particular concern to Natalie. She was worried that Michael would discover the scam. Having experience with insulin, Natalie borrowed some and injected Michael. This is what led to his death. Her homicidal behavior was brazen and obvious, similar to her fraud. Natalie had somehow convinced herself that she would never be held accountable for anything that she did. She was good at deceiving others, but even better at deceiving herself. Those are my thoughts on the case of Natalie Cochran. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you soon.